Okay, so
explain this to me like I'm five.
Okay, hold on. All right, so we talked about this last week. We a little bit. So you were helpful in that you sort of helped us understand some of what was going on with these what are now called meme stocks. I think that's a pretty good way to categorize.
What is a meme stock?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't use that term last week. But we did talk about Wall Street Bets. We talked about GameStop and the role. I think when we talked about it last week, it was not just clear. Happening. Yeah, it was just sort of happening. And I think we thought of it as, hey, here's some people who figured out a clever way to game the system and maybe make some money and take some money from some hedge funds. Yep. Whereas, obviously this past week, it's developed quite a bit into something that's got much more of like a social component to it.
Yeah.
So this isn't. I would just say it's fair to say that this isn't just about people making money.
Correct.
Maybe.
It's certainly more controversial than it was last week, I think.
Yeah.
Given what the SEC has done and given what some of these trading apps have done.
So it just may be helpful for us to review the financial aspect of it and just talk about sort of what was going on or what's been going on and why.
Yeah, which is good because we genuinely, it is maddening thinking about it last time, which I really liked our conversation, but we never actually even got into short selling, which is like the gist of the whole
because to understand the short squeeze itself, we have to understand what short selling is, right?
Yeah, you have to understand like what everyone was getting upset about with sorry, having drink problems here. Whatever people were getting upset about with hedge funds. So basically like what we mentioned a little bit last time was specifically with GameStop. I think when we talked, like GameStop was up like hundreds of percent. It started.
It was in the 300, at least 300, maybe even.
Okay.
I think the 400
so
range.
Thousands of percent.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was like $400 at Wednesday at its height.
I think it got up to like 550 or something.
Okay.
And it started coming into 2021. It was at under $20.
Yeah.
A share.
For sure. Yeah.
Which is just crazy, insane return or increase in terms of price. But yeah, basically, I guess, which we talked a little bit about like short positions, like, you can be short or you can be long on a stock in terms of your outlook, and the way you approach the investment, a good way that you can make money. And there's a lot of ways you make money on a stock. Being short on it, meaning that you essentially think that the business value in the future is going down. For instance, with GameStop's a pretty self-explanatory kind of company when you think about like the future of gaming or something. And I'm not a gamer, but I can just tell you it's not on like a brick and mortar retail,
right?
Selling CDs, right?
Hey, just a quick note. It was actually, it went up to $468 on Wednesday.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So
and what is it at? What is it at right now?
It is at $90 right now.
Ooh, which is pretty hard for a lot of people.
The end of
because
the
somebody bought it. You said 490.
Yeah. So
somebody bought it at 490.
Let's see.
Just hard to think about.
Yeah.
So prior to all of this, it was kind of around 87, 82. So it's going back to levels that it was at prior to all the news.
So
okay.
So there were people who looked at GameStop as a business and said, we think this is a dying business and the value of the business is going to go down.
Yes.
So they bought shares.
No, they didn't buy shares. So what they did
is they borrowed shares.
So that's the standard way that you can make money on a stock, which is really, pretty easy to understand, is like anything, you'd buy it today and you'd sell it tomorrow for a higher price or at some point in the future. So you buy low, sell high, right?
Yeah.
With short selling, you're essentially borrowing the share
high.
You're borrowing the share and selling it high.
Well, yes.
You're selling it high, and then with the promise that you're going to return the share, you're going to buy it low. And it doesn't. It's unique with stocks because you couldn't really in the real world.
But you're betting. You're betting.
You're betting against the stock.
You're betting against the stock, and it's a promise that you have to sell the stock back within a certain period of time.
Essentially, yeah. And actually, you're pretty much at the most of those like contracts, from what I understand, are written in such a way that essentially they can call that stock back. Like they can make you buy that stock and return it pretty much anytime that they want.
And as long as it doesn't go up, you're fine.
Yeah, I mean it can go up, obviously small amounts.
But you'd lose money.
You would lose money if you had to buy it back and return the stock immediately. So like I guess an example would be like, which doesn't. I'm trying to think of an example that would happen in the real world. But the best thing I can think of is like a real estate deal. Like if you owned a house, I could lease the house, say for like 10 years. I'd be like, hey, I'm going to lease the house for 10 years, and just so you know, I'm going to sell this house tomorrow, and I'm going to sell it because I know that the foundation is garbage. Like I know that there's all these sorts of problems, and there's like termite problems in the walls, with the framing, and I know that the price of the house, and I know that this neighborhood's going to go down. I know that the price of this house is going down. Everyone's moving out of the city or whatever, and so I'm gonna basically borrow the house, and I can't legally do this, but this is just an example. I'm gonna borrow the house from you. I'm gonna pay you a fee for taking ownership for a moment of the house. I'm going to sell it tomorrow, and I'm going to return the house to you in 10 years or something. So in year 9, I'm going to have to buy the house back, and I'm betting that the house is worth significantly less when I have to buy it back in 9 years than it is today. So let's say I sell it for $100,000 today, or $200,000 for a house today. In a year or 9 years, I guess, in this example, I'm going to buy it back for $100,000 because it's only worth the land that's underneath it or something, right? Mm-hmm. So I made $100,000 because I sold something for $200 and I bought it for $100. So it's just essentially just the orders reversed.
Yeah.
It's not a game. It's not a gimmick. It is a real
Well, it's not a gimmick in the sense. Well, okay, but let me push back on that a little bit because I agree with you in principle that it's not a gimmick, right? Because if you think there's a legitimate reason to think that the shares are going down, and you're in essence you're betting against that company, like you said.
For sure,
but you're still to some degree betting, because it's still a bet. You're still betting that the company will go down.
You're not. It's not based on.
I mean, it's not based on any kind of guarantee. You're assuming the company could come out tomorrow and announce something, and then it could go back up. But
I'll tell you an example that has been short. A lot of big short sellers are they're not only pessimists, they're doing like severe fundamental analysis, meaning they're looking at all the financials of a business, its place in the marketplace, and they're saying like this thing is overvalued, or and a good example is they see fraud. That's a pretty common short selling position. Is like I forget the name of a company that takes big short positions in stocks where they look at it and they say like, no, this company's not making what they say it's making, and so I know that there's people that are going to go to jail eventually or whatever.
But how would you know that?
Yeah, you wouldn't know that.
Trading.
You wouldn't know that as much as you would know, like you're looking at the books and you're saying it's the same way that someone's waving a flag and saying, hey, this stock's really great. Yeah. This company's got a great place in the marketplace, going forward. Yeah. You're looking at it and you're saying, hey, something's off here. This is bad. This company's in a GameStop's a good example, because you're like, hey, like this stock is not going to go up because GameStop lost $100 million last year or whatever. They're not making $100 million next year.
Yeah, I get that. And there's two things about the situation. To argue from the side of the Reddit, what do you want to call these people?
Hey, real quick before you get into that,
what?
I just wanted to add something to what Daniel was talking about with shorting, that it doesn't make it more gambling, but it contributes to the risk of it. And that's that you when you borrow shares to short, you are doing that on margin, meaning that the brokerage that you're using is actually giving you the money to borrow the shares. It's not actually your money. You have to have a certain amount in your account. So that there's basically collateral if they want the shares back.
That's right.
But most of the time you're shorting with money that's not your own.
Okay.
At least a percentage. Usually it's like 70% or something.
So,
it's the same way a lot of guys, make more money by borrowing. They trade on margin as well. So when they go long in a stock, they take a long position. A lot of times, like they're trading on margin too. It's pretty common. But I will say to Andrew's point about the risk, they've got to be really, really confident. Short sellers got to be really confident in a stock when they take a short position, when they short sell a stock.
You mean confident that the stock is bad?
Yeah, confident in their thesis, which is that it's bad. And because if you think about it, if I buy a stock and I'm long in a stock, so I buy it and I sell it and I sell it and I'm going to sell it in the future, my gain is theoretically infinite. The price could go up to $1 billion a share, whatever, and I can make a ton of money. It can only go down to zero. So say it's it's GameStop's trading at $20. Like I can only lose $20 on that bet. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say bet, but I can only lose $20.
Yeah.
If you take a short position, again, the price could go infinitely high, which means that your losses are theoretically infinite.
Right.
Which is the challenge, right? So that's the major risk where you got to be really, really confident in your analysis of the business in order to take that position, because if it goes up, you're going to squeeze, which is what we're probably going to talk about.
So let's get into that. So I think when we initially talked about it, we sort of we looked at it as, hey, here's some people who figured out they could target a stock, a shorted stock. They could squeeze up the price, so they could pump up the price, squeeze these people, and create that kind of problem that you're talking about, where they would increase the price, the call on these stocks, so they'd have to return what they've borrowed. They'd be forced to pay out. They would lose billions, which in some cases that has now happened. There's companies or hedge funds that have lost billions of dollars.
Yep.
So, from what I understand, and just reading through this, I think there's two arguments that have been made about the squeeze position. So you have the folks who are shorting, and this is a known practice, right? Like this has been going on for. It's not something that people are surprised that people are shorting stocks. No. It's a known thing.
No, but I will say it's an insulting thing. If you're in a company a company that's being shorted, it's essentially, you could think of it as a slap in the face.
Yeah. So there's some of these retail investors point to the fact that this, at least when it came to GameStop, that this actually goes back, to back last year, that it wasn't simply a matter of looking at this stock and saying, hey, these guys are shorting it, we can do a short squeeze and make a bunch of money. That there were some people who legitimately thought that the short itself was not accurate, that the people betting against GameStop were doing them a disservice, because they, you mentioned all the reasons why they might be a dying business. There are some, retail investors, small guys, just people with a little bit of money, not a corporation or a big entity, who said, hey, you know what? I don't know that that's a legitimate thing to bet against GameStop, because they're making changes. They brought in a new board member who is really popular. They are transitioning to an online model. They're seeking to do well as a company. And some of these people thought, hey, actually, I think this is not a legitimate thing, and I'm going to bet for them. I'm going to bet that they're going to go up. So I'm going to buy shares. So there were some people that did that initially.
Yeah. But I will argue that even that has that sort of anti-institutional strain to it, because
hold on. Whoa. What's anti-institutional about someone saying they disagree that someone's evaluation of a stock
because when there's a lot of short pressure on a stock, it's actually good for those who are going long, who are buying into the stock, because there's more shares being sold into the market, which is driving the price down, which means that you're able to buy the stock at a value.
Unless, and you can't tell me this isn't the case, because this is the other argument that these people have made, is that this practice of short selling is not healthy, because for a long time now, what companies will do is they'll get on, or people will get on media and they'll talk a stock down, or or the short itself will create an artificially negative view of the company that can force it into bankruptcy early.
Yeah, that's a good. Hold on. So there's a lot of good elements in that, and that's actually a really interesting thought. Because, like Andrew said, like when you take a short position, when you short sell stock, you are initially selling, which means you're driving the price down.
Right. So
there's a chance there that there's a value opportunity in that sense. I will say GameStop lost $100 million. What is really interesting to me
is... there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. What is really interesting to me is kind of what you just mentioned a little bit, is there is like such a mixed bag. Like obviously people had totally different, there's a bunch of people had totally different motivations for both buying the stock and for shorting the stock, right, or whatever. Whether it was what Andrew just mentioned, because the reason why we started talking about this last time was we were talking about like conspiracy theorists and this whole crowd, and somehow we sort of thought maybe there's a unique like sense in which maybe there's some kind of connection with with that, like what Andrew mentioned, like the anti-institutional.
Well, I think there's no doubt that what we saw over the last like week or two has a kind of populist, or took on a kind of populist sentiment, or at least that it had like a kind of there was clearly a desire on some people's part to do something. There was people who coalesced around it who were definitely trying to do something anti-institutional. Like I don't think that's you had anarcho-capitalists, you had people who were socialists, you had people, eat the rich was trending. So there were people who were coalescing around this who had a lot of different sentiments about why they were doing what they were doing. So there's no doubt about that.
So just to finish our conversation before, like leading into sort of the setting of like the conversation, what was interesting is, you had a bunch of people taking a short position or short selling this stock, and taking other short positions, but essentially like you had a bunch of people look at that and say, okay, there's 130% or whatever the deal is. I didn't actually look at the numbers, but
138%.
138% short position or whatever in the short interest in the stock, and people people basically got on Reddit and Wall Street Bets, which is a specific like thread or whatever on Reddit, and we're posting like, hey, okay, here's an opportunity we can squeeze, kind of stick it to the man. Yeah. We can, if we all buy this share, we're going to force the price of the stock up. And what Andrew mentioned, which is a good point, is a lot of those short sellers that's on margin, which means that there's requirements, collateral requirements, meaning you have to have a certain amount of cash. So as that price goes up, there's like essentially a margin call where, hey, you need to put cash in, or we're gonna take your position or whatever the deal is that they do.
Yeah, and the reason they do that is that they want to get their money back eventually, and they need to know that you're good for your word, essentially, in borrowing the stocks. So what happens is in a margin call, they're not actually taking any money, but like Daniel said, they're requiring you to add a certain percentage of the
collateral,
of the difference between your position and what the stock has become.
So people on Reddit and Twitter were like, hey, there's money to be made. So if we force the price up, there's money to be made, specifically in the loss of money of specifically Melvin Capital, which was like the largest short seller on GameStop, and lost like $2.5 billion in one day. Mm-hmm. So hey, let's force the price up. When we force the price up and they can't meet margin requirements, they can't meet the margin call, then they have to sell, or they have to buy the share. Which drives the price up even higher up. And so that's the squeeze. That's where the short seller gets in a really tight position where he's he's like losing money every day, and it could go theoretically infinitely up.
And I'll add, there's another way. So they might be buying because there's a margin call, or because the brokerage is requiring them to give their shares back. They also might be buying in order to hedge their bets,
offset their losses.
So so they have like in their pocket a certain amount of shares that maybe like, okay, we still think this stock's going to go down, so we don't want to fully get out of this, but we think that maybe we committed too much, and so we want to have this many shares in our pocket so that if it continues to go up, at least we have half of the loss.
But then the game for everybody, the game for everybody there is going to be when do you sell, because the volatility is such that you never know when it's going to plummet back down. So whether it's the hedge fund people who are trying to make up the difference or the short squeezers, I guess you would know a little bit like, okay, the margin calls come, now it's time to get out. Ideally, if the only reason you're betting on it is just to try to make money off of increasing the price. If you have a bigger motive, like say you're going long on the stock, and you think that by going short they were doing a disservice to the company, maybe you'll stay in. Or in the case of what you've seen with some of the investors, they held onto the stock, not because they were primarily concerned about making money at the end of the day, because it took on a kind of sentiment.
And I mentioned this before.
Let's just say it took on, like I said, it took on a popular sentiment. But let's not undercut the fact that around that, there was some very real desire to stick it to the man. And then there was a very real sort of virality to it, because it was very much driven by this viral moment. Right?
And Andrew, totally. And Andrew mentioned before, like on the last podcast, like it's a pump and dump. If you can get enough, if you drive enough interest around a stock, you can drive the price up, and there's money to be made if you're already a holder of the stock, right? So what I think is really interesting, because there's so many different dynamics and there's a lot of like moral issues at play on like, I mean, there's dozens of different like perspectives and things that are going on. What's really interesting to me is there's obvious market manipulation, right? So people on Twitter with huge following, I think Wall Street Bets has like 20 million or something people that are like part of that community.
But so you're saying there's artificial manipulation by the people who are tapping into the viral moment, and driving the but they would say, well, companies doing these shorts have been doing the same thing.
That's pretty interesting. Yes,
for years.
That's what's interesting about it, is because that's kind of my point.
Can you unpack that though?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So on Wall Street Bets, obviously somebody posted, and I don't know exactly the timeline of events, but somebody posted basically everyone's short selling this GameStop. Like, let's stick it to them. They got 130% short interest in the stock. There's a huge opportunity. They're really exposed. We can do this. We can squeeze them real tight, right? And again, we kind of mentioned this last time, but it is interesting to kind of draw the line back to Tesla, where Tesla, and I mentioned this even today, short selling a stock is a very risky thing to do, and it's also a very offensive thing to do.
Right.
To people who are long in the stock, who like the company, who want to see it grow and succeed, it's very offensive, especially when you're a stock that needs cash.
And it has have a real self-fulfilling prophecy effect. Meaning, if you've got people who are long on the stock and they look and there's several hedge funds who have shorted the stock, that's going to affect other people. Other people are going to come in and go, well, I'm not going to invest in this. It's being shorted.
Yeah. The short interest in a stock is definitely something you look at. And
just to add some complexity, though, I think in the short term that's definitely true, and maybe there's an argument that shorts can potentially bankrupt a stock. Add to some kind of market frenzy and negative sentiment around it. I will say, in the long term, if the stock has a decent financial foundation, then it will correct. This is the whole idea of the efficiency of markets that Daniel was talking about last week. that essentially, eventually, all the emotion that's around, like, oh no, like there's short sellers, or oh my gosh, all these people are buying and the stock's going up. Eventually, that all corrects itself to the actual value of the company per share.
Yeah.
And so,
right. So to finish the comment though that you made about the short sellers pumping their stock, or essentially like promoting their position that they have a huge short position in stock. You're right, and that's the interesting ethical and like moral complexity there, because what people are doing on Wall Street Bets, on Reddit and on Twitter, and saying go buy GME, go buy GameStop. They're helping their position. They already own GameStop, like, right? So go buy it just means like I can sell it to you for a higher price, and there's always a seller. Like anytime when a trading a price of the stock goes up to $438 or whatever we said.
Yeah.
Somebody bought it. Somebody sold it, and somebody bought it at $438. Like that's the price, right? So Wall Street Bets, people on Wall Street Bets pumping that. Specifically, there's one guy, which we're not going to mention, but
we mentioned him last week. We definitely did.
Who?
Dave?
No. The guy named DFV.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So they're pumping their stocks, right? And it's pretty obvious market manipulation, and that's against the law. And the SEC is.
Hold on, though. Wasn't DFV the one who wrote the initial manifesto?
I think so. He's the guy who started the whole thing, right?
Yeah, he's the one who wrote the sort of manifesto where he was arguing that he thought the short sell was illegitimate.
Yeah, my whole point is that he's the one who started the buying like frenzy over GME.
Yeah.
The interesting, and I'm trying to get to this, the interesting point there is that people on CNBC every single day, and I can't stand listening to CNBC for this reason, because hedge fund managers and big investors get on there and they pump their stock.
Yeah.
Like that's the whole point. You don't mention stock on CNBC and how you're long in stock. Let's say like, for instance, there's a company recently like Palantir. They do like information, like data analytics, data information and stuff, data science and stuff like that for the government and other things. No one even really knows what they do, whatever.
Yeah.
It's kind of frustrating because watching like people can just get on CNBC. And I'm not trying to say, Palantir's not worth whatever it went to recently, but people can get on CNBC.
Sorry, Palantir, if you're listening to this.
Sorry. Yeah, because
they totally are.
Like, people get on CNBC and they already own Palantir, for instance, and they're pumping Palantir. Like, if you give it airtime, people are going to buy it, right?
So that's the argument that some of these guys are making,
and vice versa on the short selling.
Not even just the retail investors. So you got guys like Mark Cuban who are saying, "Hey guys, we've been doing this stuff for years. This is the game we've been playing."
Yep.
And now they've figured out how to use they've figured out how to use social media.
Yep.
And use the same tactics that we've been using. Just doing a better job at it.
That is a fascinating argument because.
Hey, real quick before we dive into this, I want to like unpack market manipulation a little bit more, just so that people understand. Yeah. So. Market manipulation only can occur if you own the stock that you are promoting. So if you're just like some random guy that's like, hey, I'm looking at this stock and it looks cool, I haven't bought in, but you guys should buy it, that's totally fine. But it's when you have a vested interest yourself and you start to promote a stock that there can be legal ramifications. I'm not entirely clear on
how would that work with some sort of, though, for like if you're someone like Elon Musk and you're trying to promote Tesla.
Oh, that's totally illegal.
Why would that be illegal?
Because it's a publicly traded company, and there's a lot of. So, for instance, good example.
So Tesla, he's not allowed to say, "Hey, my company's great. You should buy stocks in my company."
No. He can say no. He can do that. He can't.
Well, what's the difference?
He can't. So he can't. He did this recently. Like he said
numbers.
I guess I don't really know the details on like what the SEC requires, but yeah, it's very, very deep, very specific. I mean, you have to file a Form 4 for every single trade. You give.
Okay, so if you're talking about specific numbers, though, and that's where it becomes market manipulation, how can you peg these people online for just saying buy GameStop? and they're not saying buy.
Well, that's the question. That's the question. At what point does it become market manipulation?
Right.
So
because they have a share in GameStop.
So does Elon Musk. He has a share in Tesla. Why can't he pump up Tesla and tell you to go buy Tesla?
I will say there is. Yeah,
really.
That's strange.
There's a lot of limitations on what he can say about
and he's
Tesla
been fined.
share.
The SEC's fined him tens of millions of dollars for saying unique things about
as someone whose knowledge of the stock market has grown exponentially.
Listen, this is public.
I love it. I love one of the memes online. A guy said, "In all my 3 days in the stock market, I've never seen anything like this." I guess for someone like me listening to that, I'm trying to understand it as a free market.
Yeah,
it's part of a free market, and you're thinking, how do you, as the owner of a company or the majority shareholder or whatever, you like on the one hand, how can you not promote? Why would we expect someone to not want to promote their company and stocks in their company and encourage people to buy into it?
Well, a couple of things. So let's be upfront. I'm not entirely clear on where's the line.
Okay.
Like when does it become market manipulation? But I will say it's a lot clearer when you are an employee and or an owner of a company.
Yeah.
Because you have information that no one else has, and it's essentially insider trading when you make recommendations on a stock, because you would know what's going to happen to the share price before everyone else does. And so the SEC is going to assume that your recommendations are based on some knowledge that's going to happen in the business in the immediate future that's going to impact the stock that will come out in the news in a few days.
And that's so complicated.
It is very complicated, which is why, Terry, genuinely, it is really there's hard ethical discussion to be had on public equities like that. Private equities, meaning like investments that not everyone has the opportunity to invest in.
Okay.
That's all it is. Is insider information.
Okay, maybe that's where I'm trying to separate those two, because I'm imagining why would Elon Musk not be able to go to somebody and say, "Hey man, the Roadster is going to come out in 2 weeks. He can't do that. You need to give money to our company.
It has to be fair.
But they could give private investment.
It's not fair.
But can you not do that anymore because they're a publicly traded company?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
You cannot
because they're a publicly traded company. And so think about it this way.
I see.
If he did that with Tesla and it was private, who's winning and losing in that? The shareholders, period, whatever. But if he did that when it's public, and I'm a retail, Joe Schmo, living in Northwest Arkansas, I just got, and he says, "Hey, that I just found out that our batteries don't last nearly as long, and there's all these problems with our what we thought was going to be great future for our autonomous driving stuff. It turns out that's not going to work. Our car just killed somebody, or whatever the deal is.
Yeah.
Okay, if he did that publicly and he told that to somebody, and they're going to exit, they're going to sell their share. Well, who's going to buy it? I'm probably going to buy it.
Right.
So I just got I got left hanging. So if you're not trading it regularly public, if it's not a public equity like that, it doesn't matter because nobody's going to buy it.
I get that. I guess.
And if you did, let me just say this: if you did that with a private equity, for instance, you sold something to somebody and you knew, hey, it's not worth what I'm selling it to, you would be liable to litigation. Yeah. You would get sued. So it just has a different form of
So going back to it though, so you have the argument from these retail investors and from even some people who are not involved in this.
Retail investors being just normal guys.
Well, retail investors are the people who, I'm using that term broadly to refer to the people who were buying.
Yeah, just individuals.
A retail
just individual
institution,
people. Yeah, who classify these sort of people buying these meme stocks.
Yep.
As we call them.
Because Dogecoin. You got to throw Dogecoin in.
Yeah. So, but again, like we said, you had other guys who were kind of coming to their. Let's just be clear. I do think. What I'm trying to draw out is I do think there's a bigger side to this, because you had a lot of people who were coming to their defense who were not illegitimately, Mark Cuban's not somebody who doesn't understand the market, and although Elon has his own kind of game, and the guy's made a ton of money.
No, just give him a hard time because he's made all his money in private equity stuff, venture capital stuff.
I'm sure he understands how the stock market works.
I know. I'm just joking. Obviously, I'm joking.
Either way, so there's a lot of people who have come to their defense and saying, hey, what they're doing is equally as legitimate or illegitimate as some of the stuff that the big guys have been doing for a while.
I think that's true.
Okay.
There's definitely a sense of truth in that.
Yeah. The question, as the hard part is, like, as a Christian, that doesn't make it necessarily any more favorable to me.
Yeah, of course.
It's like, it may be like, kind of tit for tat, but it's not like that doesn't.
Yeah, so we can look at that and we can say either way, there's an unethical nature to pumping or shorting potentially. Depending on how you do it. There's probably a way you could shorten it's not unethical if you just...
No, yeah. I think if you just... like what we mentioned before, if you're investing purely off of value, like, and I don't mean like value investing versus like growth investing, which is a whole different thing, but like you sincerely think that it's worth X. So let's say you buy a share of GME and you genuinely think, hey, I know they're going to turn a corner, and they lost $100 million last year. I think they're going to make $100 million this year. Yeah. Then that's a fine way to approach investing. But do you think
so ethically though? Is there something very different about? Let's say I have a share and I think, I think this company's not doing good. I'm going to sell my shares before it goes even further. That seems to be quite a bit different than, I think this company's not doing good. I can make some money off this.
You're doing this similar thing when you sell your share. Like you're
preserving your money, but you're not betting against the company in order to try to make money, though.
Yeah.
So, there are people who look at shorts and say, man, I don't know. Like Cuban's point was, hey, if we have a problem with shorts, which maybe we should talk about that, then let's talk about whether or not there needs to be some regulations on shorts themselves.
Here's something to think about. Like the market should punish and reward managers. So with good decisions or bad decisions. So when one of the things generally, let's just not use Tesla as an example because they don't really fit this very well. But when a CEO misses its earnings like expectation, the stock price is supposed to go down in theory. Like the value of the business. Hold on.
Explain what you mean by that.
So like, let's say the company doesn't make as much money as they should, or we're expecting to.
Right.
Then the company is worth less than what was thought. So Andrew's thought of like efficient markets where the price of this company is worth $100 million, but they turn out to not be making the money that they should be. There's something wrong. The manager did a bad job. The price of the company should go down.
Right.
Yeah, because in theory, every company is worth a certain multiple of their earnings.
Yes. Absolutely.
Based on like how much potential there is for growth in the future, or not.
Okay, but
so there's a real valuation of finance. All finance is the present value of future cash flows.
Right.
And if the future cash flows are not there, for instance, in GameStop, where they're losing money left and right, and yet the business is worth like $6.5 billion or whatever they just said. I just looked up right now. But the point being that the manager. The market cap, $6.27 billion. They deserve to the value of the business needs to be hurt because they're
and
not making money.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that because that makes sense.
So short sellers doing that?
No. A short seller is doing something more than that. A short seller is at least saying somebody who sells their shares is doing that. Somebody who says, I see this company and I think it's going to go down, and I think I can not just sell my shares and and save myself from losing money, but I can actually make money off of the failure of this company.
Yeah, a short seller is selling their shares as well. They're selling it now, and they're promising to buy it back in the future and return it.
Right, but with the express intent of trying to profit off of the failure of this company.
Yeah, I guess when I before last week, when I think of short sellers, I'm mostly thinking of people who are looking at a business and saying, one, there's probably fraud involved with this business, or is the best example like Nikola or something. There's a major problem with that, or there's this thing is so substantially overvalued, and the managers are basically lying. Or
I'm not disagreeing with you that there's legitimate reasons for someone to look at a stock and think this is overvalued and it's going to go down. I'm talking about the ethics of making money off of that.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's where some of the people some of the people are just they don't have any intention to do anything. It's just popular sentiment. I think there are some people who understand the system and have a legitimate problem with short positions and say, we don't think this is an ethical thing, and we're going to punish these people for it, or we're going to try to expose this as a problem.
Yeah, well, that's where you lose me.
That's probably a small margin of people who are doing this, but I'm not arguing that that's the best way to handle it.
No, it's funny. It would be funny to me. Yeah, it would be funny to me if, and that kind of is the conversation, and that's what I was talking about earlier. If the way that this is all framed is, we think it's unethical that people are shorting this, beyond 100% or whatever. Okay, the response that we're going to do is we're going to stick it to them and cause them to hurt and to suffer. Okay, that's you're just being equally unethical.
Yeah,
but I think you have a point in the sense that it's hard to make an argument that shorting a stock is adding value to anybody other than yourself.
Right.
I mean, you can make the argument in a sort of like large scale, like, hey, you're kind of
but if
you're
we go
helping
back
the
to,
market.
If we go back to what we talked about, if we go back to what we talked about last week, and we think of this, how should Christians think of the stock, or what's the ethical? Maybe it's not the right. What's the actual purpose of the stock market? And we understand that it's to create capital, to improve businesses by allocating capital to those businesses, and so that people who are doing that can, at the same time, gain capital and then use that and can just continue the system. Those people who gain from that capital can then allocate that capital somewhere else. It's to improve the whole market, right?
Sure, and once you reach a certain threshold of percentage in the company, you can actually have a legitimate sway over where the company goes.
Right, exactly.
With your shares, with your ownership.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of benefits to the market that extend far beyond just the individual.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, and what I probably agree with, though I don't agree with the methods behind what these people are doing at all, is I think as I sort of started to understand what was happening, I understood the sentiment to a degree, and understood that I can understand why someone would see shorting as a problem, because it doesn't seem to add any larger value to the market. It seems to just be, hey, I can make money off of this failure. And then, as some of these people argue, by doing that,
what about an argument saying,
these companies?
What if I told you I'm a short seller, I've got a short position in this stock, and I've poured through their fundamentals, and I've poured through all their financials. I've done fundamental analysis. I've poured through their financials. I've done all this work, and I'm telling you, something's off about this company. It's off. There's something weird about it. There's some kind of fraud. This doesn't make sense or whatever.
Yeah.
So I've added value to the market, right? By blowing the whistle and saying, hey, there's something bad here, and you guys need to take a look at it. I deserved a monetary benefit off of that, right?
I don't know about that.
Maybe, but I would say yes if the money that you were benefiting from wasn't coming from the people that you were warning.
Yeah, because by doing that and by saying that, and then
SEC or something, that would make sense to me. But if I'm like, hey, you need to get out of this as I make money off of the shares that you sell,
or if you worked for I don't know if you worked for a company, Melvin or something, and that was your job, and someone said, hey, we want to pay you. Hey, you've done a really good job of identifying trends when a company's going to go low so that we don't lose money, and we appreciate that, so we're going to pay you. Fine.
I don't know. It's an interesting topic, because I do think Christians, and we've talked about this, and I am interested in talking about this, Christians should have a unique approach to the marketplace in their understanding of how they ought to be rewarded for their labor.
Yeah.
And it's not a quick buck in a day. I genuinely, I think day trading is, this is probably stupid to say on a recorded thing, but I do think it's it is unethical in a large way. I don't know what motivates a Christian to commit, to be a day trader, $15,000 or more a day in trading a stock, whatever. Yeah. So, and I don't know, I don't have a good argument. I guess I should have come with one for a short seller. I don't short stock, but a Christian should not not play into the buying AMC and the GME and stuff like that.
Sure.
Because they think it's going to go. They know it's going to go up, not because it's actually worth what it's going up, but because they know that everyone else is going to buy it, and I can sell it to somebody else.
You're trying to capitalize on emotion.
Yeah, and I do know, and I know Christians who bought AMC and who bought GME, and they've made a bunch of money off of it, and it's like, but I have a hard time, like, ethically and like with my conscience, to say like that was a good thing that you did.
Well, it's a gamble for sure. I mean, I think part of the problem was, like as much as I over the past week can look at this situation and go, I understand where these guys are coming from to a certain degree. I am certainly never got to the point where I was ready to buy any of these things because even if I thought, like, I remember looking at like Dogecoin, which is a cryptocurrency, and I was following this along, and like I guess it was Thursday night when it was starting to go up, and I thought, man, this is really cheap. Somebody could just buy into this right now and sell tomorrow, and they're going to make money. Like, it's a guarantee. But like you said, like in that case, you're not only contributing to the volatility in the market, which is not helpful, but you're basically just all you're doing is helping yourself.
Yeah.
You're not making any sort of legitimate investment into the market.
Yeah.
Even if you feel like now, I think there were some people who just thought, this isn't about money, this isn't about the market, this is about making a statement and trying to...
Yeah, maybe there was like 10.
I don't know if
righteous indignation.
Just 10 people.
I'm just kind of joking. I'm being a little facetious. But I think maybe there's a couple people who can like make some kind of argument.
I will say this. I think that sentiment got increased exponentially on Thursday.
Well, that's true, but let me make this argument. If you are one of the people, let's say you have a pretty sizable holding on GameStop, and you're hearing all these arguments, and you realize the ramifications of a company shorting you, that you deem the short to be illegitimate, or sorry, an institution shorting you. There may be an argument from a Christian standpoint that it's legitimate to try to fight back a short for the sake of preserving the value of the company.
That would be something akin to more like the people who got into it a year ago, rather than the people who tried to buy it last week because, or maybe you thought,
I don't know. I don't know, because if your argument is true, and there's a possibility that so much pressure from the short market could cause a company to go into bankruptcy, and you think that's wrong, then essentially what you're doing by buying during the frenzy is kind of hedging your bets.
Right.
Like you're basically fighting against you losing all your money. And again, if you think that that's illegitimate, and you think that this is all pressure from institutions that are just trying to manipulate the stock, which I don't know if that's exactly what's going on, but there may be an argument that it would be okay from a Christian standpoint to sort of fight off against something like that.
Interesting things like Michael Burry, who's the guy who figured out about the 2008 housing crisis, who shorted the housing market.
Fund manager.
He bought into GameStop last year, and he's made something like his stock has gone up like 1,800%. I don't know why he bought into it last year, but he bought into it, and
he saw this coming.
So what, like $7 or something, right? So
I don't know how much he bought into it, but he bought it enough to make money off of it.
Yeah, but and again,
I'm just saying I'm bringing him up because I'm saying there were people, not just some dude on Reddit, who saw that and thought, no.
Listen, Melvin Capital, $2.5 billion they lost in a day. They had a substantial short position in GameStop. So, and again, the bigger the short position, the more it drives down the price of the stock. So, again, Andrew's point was like, at some point, that short position's driven down the stock so much, it's actually worth more, and so you can legitimately make more money. You can make money off that in a real way. The problem is GameStop's lost $100 million last year, so it's technically worth. I don't know the details of DFV's manifesto on it, but I know
he had a little bit more. I think he looked at that. He brought all that in, and he said, "Look, even with that, I don't think that's legitimate because of these reasons." Let's talk about though Thursday, because I think Thursday is what added complexity to this issue, which is already a really complex issue, right?
Yeah.
So
was that AMC or Dogecoin?
This was no. This is Robinhood.
So
Robinhood.
These retail investors riding high Wednesday. They get it up to its highest.
Yeah.
They come in Thursday thinking, man, this thing's going like to the moon. Whatever that means,
and back.
We're gonna just keep driving this stock up higher and higher.
Yeah.
It's arguably at its sort of most viral in some sense.
Yeah.
Although I think that what happened Thursday made it go even higher. But
this is great.
So they get it. They go in to start buying, and then very quickly Thursday, these brokerage firms, Robinhood.
No, it's not a brokerage firm necessarily. They're not. They're different. They're actually a little bit different, but you can say trading platform.
Trading platform.
Some of them are brokerage firms,
like Charles Schwab or something.
Yeah.
Or TD Ameritrade.
But Robinhood is this is fundamental to what your question is. But just to be clear, I don't think it's necessarily a brokerage firm, but the way that what's important is the way that they operate is a little bit different. They're a trading platform. This is how people were buying. It's
this
a really
is how
simple
they were
app.
buying. Yeah, it's an app on your phone that you can use to buy these stocks.
Some of them are.
Some of them are buying on Robinhood.
I mean, they're all apps. I assume they're all apps, but they operate in different ways. So, like Robinhood would be operated differently from like TD Ameritrade.
Right. Okay.
It's an important distinction.
It's important. Okay. So, folks are using Robinhood to buy. Robinhood's first one to start blocking shares or reversing some buys that had already gone through.
No. They stopped people from buying any more shares.
Okay, but some people.
But they could sell.
Some people were having. They had bought shares that previous night, and they woke up and found their shares had been reversed. Different things were going on.
I don't know.
Different claims about what was going on, but you could sell your shares.
Yeah.
I don't know who you'd sell them to because no one can buy them. But
that's an important distinction.
Well, the point.
But you can sell them, but you can't buy them.
Correct.
Yeah. Totally.
And the people who these retail investors, a lot of them looked at this as. What in the world is going on here? You can just hit timeout on the stock and say you can't buy this anymore.
Totally.
Yeah, and they saw it completely as Robinhood siding with the hedge funds because ultimately, if you can only sell the shares that you're in, you can't buy them. Nobody can buy it. Then that means that you can't drive the price higher up, which means that you can't continue this short squeeze.
But how is the price going down?
Because you can only sell, and all these people realize, oh wait, we can't buy anymore.
Okay, this is an important distinction. So to answer your question,
to people off of Robinhood.
Yeah. So Robinhood is not an actual brokerage. This is I know we're getting.
But all these other platforms followed suit, right? Pretty quickly. Quickly.
There was a few.
No, there was a lot.
Pretty quickly. That's new information.
That's what complicates it. No, that's why I was making those distinctions.
Okay, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
But let me make this point. Robinhood is not. I guess I'm just going to say the word broker. They don't actually execute your trade. Robinhood. If you own a Robinhood, if you have a Robinhood app. There's no fees to trading, which is really cool and it's really nice. The thing is, they make money by essentially selling your trade off to somebody else who executes it. Specifically, what's called a clearinghouse executes your trade, and the clearinghouse, because of the lag in in time and the way that money has to move. Well, I'm not going to get into that yet, but it's different than a broker, specifically like Charles Schwab or TD Ameritrade. It's probably the same way, where they're just connecting a buyer and a seller and they're executing the trade instantly, probably within their own network. So
Robinhood's claim is, from what I understand, which has been made, which is slightly changed from Thursday to recently, because I think most recently Elon was grilling Vlad, the CEO of Robinhood, on what's that platform? It's an audio chat. No, it's an audio chat. Clubhouse.
Yeah.
So he interviewed this guy.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so it's like an audio chat platform where you
It's radio on the internet.
Basically.
Really?
Yeah.
Kind of. But I think you can, a big group of people can just jump onto it.
That's right.
Oh,
only
weird.
a certain amount of people.
And so somebody got him and Vlad together, and he grilled Vlad, and Vlad's explanation was essentially, from what I understand, and you can correct however I misunderstood his explanation, was in order to make good on these buys, they're beholden to a consortium which acts as a sort of regulatory organization. Mm-hmm. And Elon's asked him, is this a government regulatory organization? No. And his answer was no. It's a consortium of people in the industry.
It's actually Wall Street.
And so,
banks own this thing.
All right, which
means that they made a killing when the volume of trading went up substantially on Robinhood, which is so fascinating. Like, you know who made money off that is like Wall Street banks. Yep. They made literally tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in days, over this trading platform. That's a whole other thing.
So you've got a non-government regulatory consortium made up of industry folks. Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to give a definition of what clearinghouse. No one knows what that means.
I don't know. It's just the word.
But the way Vlad explained it was it's a group of people in the industry who oversee these trades. And part of what they did in this case, because of the perceived volatility of these buys, they put some sort of premium on the buy.
No. I don't know about that and the premium.
Well, okay,
go ahead. Yes.
But so his explanation was because this group looked at the buys that were coming in and said, "Hey, we don't like this because we think this is volatile, and so if you're gonna buy these, and we're gonna give you what you want, you're gonna have to give us substantially more money for what these
collateral
are worth. And so you're gonna have to give us like $3 billion." Yep. And Vlad said, "We don't have that. We can't do that. We got to stop buys."
Which is insane because they raised $1.6 billion in a day, which is incredible.
Well, this is after that.
Yeah, right.
This is after that.
So just to be clear.
But to be clear, so on the one hand, that's not a liquidity problem. On the one hand, it is, right?
It's a liquidity. No, it's like a margin call, is like what we mentioned before. They do in higher volume times. They require like more cash.
Who's they though?
The clearinghouse. The people who are executing the trades.
Hold on. The clearinghouse, i.e., the consortium of people who are in Wall Street, who are not government regulators.
That's a good point,
right?
Yeah, it's similar to like a bank, but I mean, like they need collateral, and not only that, they need it like equivalent to or relative to the amounts of trades that are happening. And when Robinhood like overnight shoots through, probably 10x their 10 times their normal trade amount, Robinhood has to like transfer money. And there's all sorts of issues involved with that, where even just when you get that volume, so when you're a Robinhood trader, let me just explain this a little bit. When you're a Robinhood trader and you sell, you get your money immediately. Yeah. But the money didn't actually the money has to be moved around and then has to go traded. From the buyer through the clearinghouse through Robinhood back to your account. There's a long process.
It's also the same reason why you can trade immediately when you've deposited from your bank account. Buy again. Because the money that's being given to you isn't actually the money that came from your bank account. It's money that came from the clearinghouse.
All that's to say, there's a float. There's money that's just kind of not quite there and not quite here, and it's getting moved around.
It's all accounted
billions
for,
of dollars.
Yes.
Yeah, it's billions of dollars. And when the clearinghouse is like, "Hey, Robinhood, I need $1.6 billion tomorrow," it's not made up. It's genuinely is a real.
I mean, it is. I'm not saying it's made up, but the way I understood him was this clearinghouse or this group of Wall Street bankers can say, "We think that you should pay us a lot more money if you're going to be doing these trades."
Yeah, maybe.
And so because we perceive volatility here, and I would imagine that's what he means by calling them a regulatory agency. So how are they regulating? How are they regulating the market if not by putting extremely high premiums?
No, I don't know about a regulatory. I don't know why he would have said that. I don't think they're necessarily a regulatory market. They're regulating Robinhood and requiring collateral of cash at their bank.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it would make any sense for them to stop the trades because of volatility, unless the volatility was an issue with Robinhood not being able to have enough collateral.
But that's what I'm saying, is that Vlad's explanation was what the clearinghouse required of them was substantial amount of money in order to in order to process these buys.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't meet that demand, and so they shut the trades down.
It honestly makes a little sense, but I guess your point is that maybe the hedge funds
I'm not saying that. That's a conspiracy theory.
No, I mean, I think that's
I think what people are saying here is, on the one hand, I think it's obviously a conspiracy theory to say Citadel called up Vlad and said, cut these trades off immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, may or may not have happened. Probably didn't happen. I think when he says what happened, I buy what he says, that there is this process in place. I think for me, though, as someone, again, who's pretty new to the market, went, that's weird. I mean, I get it, but it's weird that I guess what people who are looking at this, who have been on the outside, and this is what some of the people who are doing this are trying to say, is that, like, this is a very strange system, and it's not entirely clear all the time that everything is kosher.
Yeah. So Robinhood, I think, is hazy because of the way that it's structured. I think what may add to what you're saying is the fact that other brokerages followed suit with Robinhood.
Right.
I didn't know.
So can we look that up? Can we look up which?
I mean, you can't.
Which firms of that?
TD Ameritrade. I heard for.
Daniel's mic just slammed into his chest.
I know TD Ameritrade pretty much right after that shut the trading down. I know you couldn't buy it on Cash App.
Yeah.
You couldn't buy it on. I mean, it got to the point.
Cash App would probably be similar to Robinhood, but TD Ameritrade.
It got to the point where I'm pretty sure you could only buy it on like one or two. It got to the point where you could only buy it on like one platform, like Webull.
Oh, really?
Was like the only one I knew of that people could buy it on.
Yeah. And
then they opened it back up where you could, where I think you could like, on Friday, you could buy again, but it was only like, you could only buy one. I think it was like initially 5 shares, and then they cut it down to 1 share.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, I think they shut it down again yesterday. And as far as I understand, you still couldn't. I mean,
so what's hard about this though is that all of these places that we're talking about, like even TD Ameritrade, Cash App, Robinhood, Webull, all of those offer commission-free trades. So essentially, you can buy and sell stocks for free.
Right.
And usually, when that's the case, there is some kind of weird structure like Robinhood has, where there is a clearinghouse and essentially like. These places are able to make stock trading free because they're getting user data and they're doing a bunch of other things behind the scenes to actually make money.
But that doesn't make everybody feel better about the situation, right?
No. But I guess what I'm saying is like I would just what I would need to see.
It's not the data's. I don't know. They may make money on data. What they're doing is they're giving you a bad deal. If you're on Robinhood and you're trading on Robinhood, they're basically upcharging you and taking a fee without you actually seeing it, which is a whole nother ethical thing that a lot of congressmen and stuff have a problem with. But they're selling your action, I guess, at a premium to somebody else. So you're getting a bad deal. You just don't know it.
Yeah. So I mean, the fact that Robinhood makes 40% of its money by selling user data to a hedge fund company. Mm-hmm. I mean, it doesn't prove anything. Yeah. But I think what people who are concerned about the situation are looking at a lot of this and said, look, to go back to Cuban's point, hey, these guys are just doing the same thing we've been doing. They just figured out how to play the game.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they didn't know this, but all of a sudden, somebody just hit, we're losing lots of money, timeout. And everything crashed to a halt, and these stocks cratered, and these people lost a ton of money. Now, you can talk about, let's talk about, like, the foolishness of what they were doing in the first place and how this is the biggest problem with gambling like that. But playing the market that way is, you don't know exactly how the market works, so maybe you can legitimately just hit pause on a stock.
Yeah.
And that's just part of the problem of not being a smart investor.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm interested in is somebody, again, who's fairly ignorant about all this and just learned a lot about it recently is I think there's relationships and complexities in the market. I think if someone like me, I perceive the market as something that's like both at the same time on a principle level very simple, or I assume it is, and then on another level, like mechanically, I think I'm like, yeah, it's probably complicated, but not because of the like complexity of all the various organizations and who may be beholden to who. And but I think what's concerning for me isn't that like, let me put it this way. I think I would have assumed in the past the stock market is complicated because math is complicated, not because there's a very strange. It's a strange like organism.
Yeah,
you get the difference.
Like so the process by which you buy and sell stocks has changed quite a bit over the last 10 years.
Sure.
Maybe 5 years is even more accurate. And so like, yeah, I think it probably was a lot more straightforward prior to that. But I will say, I mean, a lot of the math is really complicated.
I'm not saying it's not.
And that's why there's so many conspiracy theories can be built up around this.
Right.
Because once you start getting into like buying and selling what's known as derivatives, you're basically like buying and selling things that don't really exist but are like undergirded a few iterations down the line,
which is a whole deal.
But I'm just saying like I want to make the point that yes, the stock market is complicated, and that's why it's hard, even in the case of like understanding what's going on with Robinhood and these other non-brokers.
Okay.
So
I get your point that it's because of that it's easy to assume conspiracy.
Yeah.
Okay. But go back to 2008. I mean, this isn't unprecedented. This isn't an unprecedented question. So if you look at what happened in the housing market, that's not. I mean, I don't know that I would call that a conspiracy, but it was certainly a lot of fraud and shady stuff going on.
Yeah, it was fraud in the sense that what essentially happened was that the bonds and the mortgages that were being offered were being marketed as less risk than they actually were inherently.
Right, because the people whose job it was to determine the risk of the bond had a vested interest in trying to maintain business.
Yeah, and there was the way that the ratings worked was that you could essentially like lump in good mortgages and bonds
still
with bad.
But yeah, there's like financial incentives, like monetary incentives to rate them higher than they were actually rated.
So I guess the concern for someone who's outside of it, who's looking at this in the last week, is to say, I think we just sort of generally trust that everybody here is playing by the rules. But I think what it felt like was it didn't look like that. It didn't look like that everybody here was, and it's awfully convenient. Whatever the reason may be, it looks an awful lot from an outsider's perspective, like, which a lot of these retail investors are in some sense. It looks a lot like, okay, so the system it works to make, these guys can make billions of dollars, but the second they got put into a short squeeze, somebody came in conveniently and just stop the whole thing.
Yeah, it can be frustrating.
So I think, I mean, that doesn't prove anything. That doesn't prove there's resilience. I think the concern is, like, even if you start to dig into it, like Vlad's explanation, it's not satisfying in the long term because it sounds, I think it adds legitimacy to it. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't think, I don't go away going, oh yeah, like these hedge fund companies called him up and said, you better cut this out. You stop these trades right now. But I don't feel any better for him to say, oh no, don't worry, it was a consortium of industry people who put an outrageous price on these calls so that there was no legitimate way we could actually continue to sell these.
Well, Vlad, I mean, to be fair, like Vlad has no, like Robinhood again makes money off of each trade. So the more transactions that are occurring on their platform, the more money that they're making.
Yeah.
So he has there's no incentive for him. There's no motivation for him to stop trading.
Sure, I'm not saying
stock, right?
Yeah.
Now, what is maybe the clearinghouse or the banker's relationship with the clearinghouse. I mean, maybe there's some incentive for them to say, hey, like, stop, like, we're about to lose $2.5 billion today.
If there was anything going on, it would be the clearinghouse, not Robinhood.
Yeah,
because
so I would trust. Though I think Robin is stupid.
What I think would be a reasonable response to what happened with Robinhood is for retail investors to delete the app and go elsewhere.
Like, okay, but also, do you not think there's a legitimate
use code 8479?
Do you not think there's a legitimate call for the SEC to not just investigate these retail investors, but the processes itself behind, like, hey, why did this get stopped?
Yeah, they're going to, and they need to. I think. I mean,
there's already been class action lawsuits filed against Robinhood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure. And those might just be frivolous, and they might get tossed out. But
no, I mean they're legitimate. I mean, I would be really frustrated if I owned a stock and I could only, No.
Vlad said it was very clear that you would be frustrated if you couldn't sell it.
Yes.
You know what doesn't? You know what doesn't make sense now that I'm thinking about it is if Robinhood did need a certain amount of money, to be able to pay this clearinghouse to keep trading, operations going.
Yeah.
You'd think that would be a pretty easy sell to raise money. Hey, we have these.
They raised $1.7 billion in like 4 hours.
I know, but I'm saying
that's insane.
But ultimately, if you can make the case that we're going to make all of this money back in minutes,
they did, and they raised it.
But apparently they didn't raise enough.
I've never heard. Have you guys ever heard of a company that raised $1 billion, $1.5 billion in an afternoon?
I'm surprised they were able to do that when a lot of people at that moment when they raised that they just tanked their company.
No, they had previous investors pumped in. It's like a working capital issue. It's not even like a real. Not even a real problem as far as they're concerned.
I mean, they have a 1-star rating on the Google App Store right now.
Yeah,
that was even after Google. That was even after Google went in and artificially fixed that.
Oh, it's so funny.
And then they got it back down to 1-star again.
Yeah.
And Google hasn't touched it since then. My point is, there are a lot of people who say Robinhood, whatever happens here, people are not going to be using that platform.
I don't know, man. It's so easy to use their platform. They have such like a strong like moat in the market. Like
I think it would be a legitimate response. Like I'm not making a statement that like they had any kind of like foul play necessarily, but as a retail investor, I would understand the frustration of being like, hey, you've essentially like ruined this trade.
Yeah.
And you forced me to lose money in an unfair way. I think that's true, even if it wasn't necessarily, wasn't necessarily illegal. There. Yeah. Or if it wasn't, like, if they could do nothing about it, and that was just, the response. But if you, if I'm a retail investor and that's a threat in the threat, don't use the platform.
I know Elon's question to Vlad was, how do you know that the people, that the clearinghouse, this consortium of people don't have ulterior motives and
he doesn't know. He's got he got margin called basically. He's like,
Vlad's point was, I don't know that. I don't even know who these people are entirely.
Yeah, honestly, the investigation should be the clearinghouse.
But and then his point was they've been legitimate. These have been legitimate calls in the past, so I just assume it's legitimate. Which fine, I don't see any bad motive there. I agree with you. I do think, as you have, obviously this has gotten to the point where congressmen and congresswomen and senators are interested in investing or investigating. Yeah. You've got the SEC who's definitely going to investigate. I think it gets into a bigger so I said this to you, but I don't think this would ironically, I'm not sure that this would have been as big of a deal if Trump was still president. Or happened the way that it did, because I think in some sense,
it's interesting.
What this represented was there is a kind of populism at the root of our country right now that Trump was absorbing. You know what I mean?
What was so interesting to me, as I was kind of talking to people about this as it was going on, is I had no idea where someone landed on the issue. Yeah. It literally blew my mind. Not literally, metaphorically blew my mind because if we're talking about COVID, I probably know where you land, but if I'm talking about GME, I actually had no idea what position you were going to take. Like if you're for the hedge fund, or like you're saying, hey, this is stupid, this is market manipulation, or if you were like, dude, I just bought 50 shares of GME or something. Well, man, it was so crazy.
I don't know. I feel like even with COVID, I think that's becoming an increasingly common phenomenon, where you're
like politically divided.
Well, maybe politically divided, or just like all of these events keep happening where there's two sides, and there's no real way of like a traditional Republican Democrat divide or something It's hard to say.
I don't know. Ironically, I thought, even though I didn't think the skit was very good, I thought SNL this week captured pretty well a lot of this, in that they had this skit that was like, what still works? And it was a talk show, and the whole joke was this lady was going to have somebody on, and she was going to interview different people, and she'd be like, okay, you're a representative of the government, so and the first one was the lady, the Republican congresswoman who believes in Jewish space lasers. And you know what I'm talking about?
No.
So there's
that's new.
Jewish space lasers?
Interesting.
So there's this congresswoman who...
Why do they have to be like Jewish space lasers?
The congresswoman who believes that the Parkland shooting was a hoax. And that, I'm sure she believes the election was stolen. I don't know. I mean...
Is her name Alexandria Jones?
I would not want to put that on her. But she also believes that the wildfires in California were caused by space lasers that were trying to clear a path.
Seems like someone's
how the Jews own the space lasers.
Well, if you would have just put it like that, I wouldn't have responded.
Anyway,
that sounds, I don't know, I want to say mildly, but probably like heavily anti-Semitic.
Oh, no doubt. There's nothing good about that.
Which is horrible.
There's absolutely nothing about that any... Well, and, like Mitch McConnell, I think just today was like, this person is a cancer on the party. Just distance.
Oh, I did see that, but it was like initials. I didn't understand.
It was Jewish, this lady with the Jewish space laser.
I think CNN was she is the epitome of the Republican Party or something crazy.
Which is ridiculous. Well, I had somebody I knew who got online and was like, see, Republicans believe this way. This is mainstream Republican. No Republican has denounced her. It's like, most people didn't even hear. You didn't even hear about this. So, what do you mean you haven't denounced her? You wanted to come out and go, we denounced the lady who believes in Jewish space lasers. And everyone's like, what's this guy talking about? I don't know what he's talking about.
Also, how fast are you supposed to denounce things these days? Within seconds.
If you're not anti, you're for it.
In the skit, she and it's not actually her, it's SNL. Sure. She's interviewing her, and she comes on, she's like, and you actually believe this, that they're Jewish space lasers? Yes, I do. And she's like, okay, so government doesn't work. And then she goes to the next thing, and it's someone who's talking about the rollout for the vaccine, and it's O.J. Simpson, and O.J. Simpson comes on. He's like, yeah, I'm getting the vaccine, and she's like, so you're getting the vaccine, but then there are other people who haven't gotten the vaccine.
By the way, speaking of CNBC, Jim Cramer got it 3 weeks ago before my grandma.
And now they're saying Gitmo, the people at Gitmo are going to get it. But whatever.
Yeah, that's great.
So he's, OJ's like, yeah, I'm getting it, and she's like, okay, so you're getting the vaccine, but my grandmother hasn't gotten it. Okay, great. So the vaccine rollout's not working.
Yeah.
And she goes through these and she has some guy on, and he's like, Doug, something GameStop, and he's like, so you're the highest majority shareholder in GameStop. He's like, yeah, man, and it's just making fun of this whole thing that we're talking about. She's like, okay, so the stock market doesn't work. So anyways, the whole point of this, it wasn't very funny, but at the end of the day, it was I think you have so many people who feel like nobody in authority is trustworthy.
Yeah.
Nothing works the way it's supposed to. And this has just felt like, for a lot of people, one more instance of there are people who are in positions of power, or people who we trust, or people who we're supposed to trust that we can't trust.
Yeah.
And, everybody is after their own gain, and no one, is... I think it's just this prevailing sentiment in America that there's nobody trustworthy in positions of power.
So linking that with Trump, are you you said you don't think that this would have happened if Trump was still president?
I don't think it would have blown up as a meme. I think there's something about it's this weird thing where you have this populist sentiment that's been brewing since at least 2016, 2015.
Yeah.
Maybe even all the way back to Occupy Wall Street in some sense, like 2008, when people went legitimately, okay, the system's not working.
Yeah.
And then all these banks just got bailed out. I think what happened in 2016 was you had this large swell of people who felt like the system's not working, and here's a guy who's going to come in and he's not a part of the quote-unquote system. Yeah. Which you can talk about whether or not that's legitimate or not, because it's probably not. But I think there was a lot of like, here's an outsider, and we're going to trust him to come in and drain the swamp, fix the system, fix the broken system.
Yeah.
And then you had people, that just the people who got behind him and said he's going to fix the system, he's going to drain the swamp, and then everybody was just like, outrageously against him from the beginning. It just it creates this kind of like, oh, see, you're part of the system, and you're just reacting so strongly to him because you're holding on to your grip on the system, and it just created this weird kind of like mentality that now has become. Like, it's not gone away. Like, he's not there.
But I think the distrust in institutions is legitimate. Like, we're not legitimate, but
it's
real.
It's there.
Real.
Like, we have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, it's real. And I also think, I think somebody I was listening to or reading or something was saying, like, that the sort of the class warfare of America is just crazy. Like, I mean, their whole point was like, maybe there's not a racial conflict, but there's definitely class conflict, which to me felt like that with the GME thing. Like, like it's put it to the suits, it's put it to like the wealthier people, and become the rich basically, and eat the rich and become the rich.
Yeah, well, it definitely had this kind of like. Occupy Wall Street 2.0 kind of vibe to it.
Yep.
The difference being they managed to take billions of dollars from some people from Wall Street.
But I don't know if I'm misreading this, but it feels like this group is like made up of somewhat different people than the original Occupy Wall Street.
Oh, for sure, because the people who were Occupy Wall Street originally were not people who probably by and large
would have voted for Trump.
I don't. Maybe you could say that, but they're at least not the kind of people who understand enough about the stock market and have the funds necessary to invest in the stock market.
What's that theory about like the political lines? Like if you go far enough to the right and you go far enough to the left, like eventually you actually like meet each other. And
the horseshoe.
Yeah, is that what's
political horseshoe?
It kind of feels like that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So it's like the theories.
I'm talking about
it. Theories like I don't know. I guess you could explain it, Andrew.
Yeah, it's essentially like so if you think about the left and right divide in America politically, and honestly probably across the board. But essentially, you shouldn't think of it as a spectrum as much as you should think of it as like a horseshoe. So it's not just like a line that has some kind of like continual divergence, but rather like the farther apart you get on the left or the right, the more similar the sides become. And you can kind of see this in the way that, like far left and far right people call for violence against the other side. Because they don't like hold their same beliefs, and they become increasingly closed off to other people's worldviews because of how strongly they hold their own, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a theory essentially that like.
Yeah, I'm just interested in like, is it because that's what led to my kind of confusion about the thing. Like I didn't know where somebody landed. It seemed like people on the far ends of the left and far ends of the right.
The reason I think you felt that way is because Occupy Wall Street was populism on the left.
Yeah,
that's why. You had people who were anti-capitalists, maybe some anarcho-capitalists who said this system doesn't work, and and the housing market crash was proof of that. And
so i.e. like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez
and Bernie Sanders
and Ted Cruz agree.
But then I think again
on the same thing with Robin.
Let's talk about like that's populist sentiment on the left. Trump was a representation of sort of this populist sentiment on the right, and then I think you had like, again, Trump's gone, but that sentiment didn't go anywhere. It's not like it just Trump's gone, I guess we don't care about these, you know,
if anything it probably
and I think if anything you saw people on the right who said we lost. I mean, we not to speak to not to give any sort of legitimacy or illegitimacy to any of that, but at least I think on a psychological level, it's almost like the gaze got redirected to the stock market for a lot of people. Like, okay, forget about politics. Let's all focus on the stock market and let's. Yeah. So I don't know. It's weird. Like it's hard to understand collectively how people get turned to those things, and I'm not unconvinced, as David Wells would say, that there's not a demonic element to it. Yeah. But you certainly have to recognize that, like, people in our culture and our country increasingly do not trust the institutions.
Understandably, yeah.
And the things that are or the people in positions of power, whether it's on the right or the left. And
I think it's more than just that they don't trust them. I think it's that, like, they're increasingly susceptible to conspiracy theories because they assume not that they're just untrustworthy, but that they're ill-intentioned.
Right. Yeah.
You know. Yeah. So it's like
there's bad motives. Yeah. Bad actors.
Yeah. It's greed. You know. Yeah. Motivating everything, and it's just like you're saying. It's just it's the repetition of what happened in 2007.
Yeah.
And maybe, but that's the thing is, like, I hold those things with a grain of salt because it's probably true in the sense that, you know, people are obviously greedy. We know that, and we know that people are going to be motivated by greed. The question is, like, is that a concerted effort? Like, how intelligent is that effort? You know, how intelligent was the effort in 2007 or even the years prior?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's a good point, because you had, like, in The Big Short, you know, Ryan Gosling's character, he kind of makes the point, like, is this maliciousness or just stupidity? Yeah. And, you know, like, it very well could have just been stupidity or people not understanding the complexity of the monster of what this market was and what their small incremental decisions were doing to create this time bomb, so to speak, in the market.
Yeah, and I was talking to my brother this afternoon, or this weekend in the afternoon, and he was talking to me about how a lot of the veil was lifted for him about some of these conspiracy theories, like Illuminati and, like, the government, you know, coups. When he clerked for a judge on the D.C. Circuit, and while he was there, he would write opinions that would make it into, like, major public, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, things like that, and they were, you know, clerks write opinions for their judges, and so what's made public is the judge's opinion, not the clerk's opinion, obviously, but it was essentially my brother's writing, you know. And there was this pretty high profile case that got a lot of news attention, and it was really controversial, all this kind of stuff. And he went on Reddit a couple of days after having, you know, published this, and looked and saw all these conspiracy theories around this judge that he clerked for, and, you know, how she was motivated by, you know, families behind her and all this money that was, like, coming in, and what she was really trying to do to sort of, like, sway the country. Yeah. And my brother's just laughing because he's like, first of all, nobody could possibly, like, be that smart and that coordinated to be able to, like, know how the dominoes would perfectly fall from, like, one action that would lead to this action, lead to that action. And then to think that, like, it's not just that one or a few people can do that, but, like, the whole system is in on it together, so communicating about it, like.
So let me be clear. I agree with you. I don't think, if anything, in this situation, or even, like, other situations like the swamp, or, you know, like, I agree. I don't think there's a concerted group or consortium of people who are conspiring, and I think that, like you said, it's oftentimes that's helpful. It's comforting to think that that's the case. I mean, I think as Christians, there certainly is that in like a spiritual sense.
Yeah.
We do know that there are powers in a spiritual sense that conspire, and I think you can read David Wells's book Christ Above All Earthly Powers, and he talks about, you know, the way in which the demonic conspires to attack a culture, both on its political, on its cultural and artistic and philosophical levels, to you know, like it's just like a pincer movement of bad ideas.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the people, the actors, the human actors, are unaware of the ways in which these things kind of stack up and create these problems. And so I think we can see a lot of this stuff that looks like, man, none of this is working, or there's just like, everywhere we look, it seems like everybody's only concerned with themselves.
Yeah. And
I do think that's a lot of legitimate concern when you look to politics or money or, gosh, even the church, unfortunately, in a lot of places. It just looks like everybody is concerned about themselves, and in a lot of cases they are. I mean, what's out in front for most people in terms of even, like, sadly, the church? Well, it's televangelists, mega churches. It's looking at, like, people who have a vested interest in at least on the flashy side of the church, of doing what a lot of people worry that other people in positions of authority are doing, which is just using their influence for their own gain. To make money and for their own gain, and they're just using their spiritual influence, and they're you've got people, story after story after story of people not just abusing their positions of power in ministry, but abusing them in horrific ways. And then people not taking that seriously. And so there's just all kinds of reasons why I think people look around and say, and feel a kind of lack of faith in society and the people in positions of authority. And I think it's comforting to assume, to create a grand narrative, right? Like, there must be something behind this.
Yeah, I think
that's going to happen.
And I think it's interesting because, like, so many people lack, like you just kind of articulated in some ways, like a biblical worldview of recognizing, like, the love of money is the root of all evil, like all
kinds of evil.
All kinds of evil. Sorry, thank you.
It's okay.
And just the seriousness of sin, like in a culture, and specifically in people who with power, like, and that's somewhat like, as Christians, even like I don't know if you guys have talked about like congregationalism and stuff. Like there's biblical and New Testament, like obviously examples of why we should be, I think we should be congregationalists in terms of church polity, but also because we recognize like the seriousness of sin and the needs to like mitigate that sin by like spreading out power. And so when you have institutions that sort of consolidate and do give specific individuals, or there's massive amounts of power, like we've talked, I don't know if we've talked about, like, but Twitter and Facebook, and the way that they sort of dealt with the way that they are able to like censor people, and whatever you think about the situation, Jack Dorsey and oh my gosh, who's the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. I think you have massive amounts of power. What's up?
Smoking some meats.
I don't know what that means.
It's too much to too.
Sweet baby rays.
Oh, I'm sorry. But they have massive...
He's just a normal guy.
Well, they have massive... He's kind of a lizard person.
He's just a normal guy smoking meats like everybody else.
So, I have no idea what you're talking about. But the point being, like, I mean, Christians, it's a weird, like, position where it's like, on one hand, like, as a Christian, and I recognize the seriousness of sin and its ability to like make people basically insane, but at the same time also recognizing that I do have to like bend the knee in some ways to like authority, God's authority placed over me. So it's a challenging thing because, like, in one sense, like the biblical worldview, I don't trust anybody. But in another sense, like, I kind of have to just like trust God by trusting the people.
Well, that's where you have like a book like 1 Peter, that comes in handy, which I happen to have open right here.
Wow.
How does that work? Yeah, I mean, you have a book like First Peter, which I think becomes incredibly helpful, where Peter can say things like, "Dear friends, I urge you as strangers and temporary residents," and the idea that you're a stranger, that Peter would identify us as Christians as exiles or strangers or aliens, is in and of itself a sort of recognition. Hey, you're going to be in the world, but you're going to find yourself at cross purposes with the purposes of the world, and you're going to find yourself alienated from the way the world operates. And yet, as sojourners and strangers, he's going to call them and us to abstain from, on the one hand, the same kinds of desires that the world has, so like the desires for wealth, the desires for pleasure, at least in like selfish excess, like doing what these Gentiles are doing, calling them to conduct themselves honorably, and that recognizing in so doing, like they're going to look at you and say, why aren't you buying GME? Like, why aren't you doing what we're doing? Why aren't you trying to seek out your own pleasure and doing this and that? Yeah. And yet Peter makes it clear, you do these good works so that they may see what you're doing and glorify God on the day that he returns. But at the same time, like, we're abstaining from these things. And then at the same time, he's going to say, but submit yourselves to every human authority because of the Lord, whether to the emperor is supreme, and the emperor being Nero in this case, who is not a friendly guy to Christians, or governors as though sent by him to punish those who do what is evil and to praise those who do what is good. For it is God's will that you silence the ignorance of foolish people by doing good. As God's slaves, live as free people, but don't use your freedom as a way to conceal evil. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the emperor. So you have this sense in which, like, you on the one hand, we have to live differently than the world, and we don't behave like they do. We reject what they're doing, and yet at the same time, we recognize that, like, that doesn't mean that we don't submit to the institutions of this world, and that we don't knowing what, in some sense, I know there's going to be people who are corrupt and selfish and who are going to abuse the system, but I'm still going to live within it, and I'm not going to try to be a revolutionary. I'm not going to try to be constantly calling for people to overthrow the stock market and buy GME. We're going to eat the rich. Like, I think a Christian can recognize, on the one hand, like, I understand the frustration that people would have for people who seem like they are just using their wealth and power to disadvantage them. But at the same time, like, we don't join in that kind of mentality.
That's good. No, for sure. And I think that gives you, I think, Scripture gives you a balanced view of the distrust that Daniel was talking about, that, like, you recognize that you're not of this world, and that there is just recognizing sin nature present in all people, including people in the government, means that there's a kind of, like, distrust or recognition of a propensity to use power for selfish reasons, right? While at the same time recognizing that it's the Lord that, like, puts people into positions, and ultimately it's the Lord that directs history. And so that you're not, like, in this frenzy and, like, fear throughout your life, where you just recognize that.
Well, it's not just that too. It's a recognition that you're, like, not just that God is calling you to submit to those things, but that even that call to do that is an acceptance that you might suffer evil under those people.
Absolutely. And I think there's all these things going on in the Lord's providence, because the Lord is also, in his grace, restraining evil by the government, right? It's like not in all cases, but I think in a lot of cases. And I think when we conflate,
and producing good by the stock market. Producing common grace.
So there's so many things going on, and I think it's wrong to conflate, like, some corruption in the government with entire corruption. And that's just it's a it's a lack of gratitude, I think, in some ways, for the things that are good about our system. And that's not to say that it's not right, or it's never right to call out issues or things like that. Of course it is. But it's just, recognize the degree to which, we actually benefit from our government, as opposed to only receive persecution, which is the case in some governments.
And so, like on the GME thing, like it's not your role to enact like righteous like justice of the stock market, whether you feel that it's wrong or what Wall Street hedge funds are doing or not. Like up to that's up to the Lord to decide. I think what's interesting is like your responsibilities with your own like motivations in your own heart towards why you're buying or why you're selling or really like how you approach money as a really dangerous, extremely dangerous thing to be dealing with. And so it is frustrating to me a little bit, like watching even like Christians kind of get sucked into a little bit like, this is so funny, this is cool. Also, I bought GME today, I paid $300 today or whatever the deal is. The problem is like you can make an argument for like your righteous indignation, like, yeah, I'm sticking to the suits. The reality is like you're accountable to God with your own sin, like your own position, like your own heart towards why you bought GME.
Right.
And that should be your primary concern. Like, and so you like the monetary and like the issues with your like incentives for like sticking it to the man. Like it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's the flip side of like, on the one hand, I think there's some legitimate reasons why populism is there's a sort of populism in the air. Because I think there are some legitimate things that we can look at and say, man, people who should be in positions of power, like our politicians have failed us in many respects. Our people, we don't have a plethora of good role models, whether it's in politics or in business or, there's a legitimate thing there. But then at the same time, like a flip side of that is like it can feel very self-righteous to the problem is them. The problem is this. I'm not the problem. My life is not. My life's bad not because of anything I'm doing, but because of something those people over there are doing, and therefore I'm actually like the good guy here.
And as if like if you were in their position, you'd be doing something different. There's a self-righteousness
and a lack of responsibility for maybe looking at my life and saying like, man, like I'm not happy or something's wrong or I'm not, like instead of looking yourself in the mirror and going like, man, I need to get right with God, or I need to grow in these ways, or maybe I need to just like believe the gospel and recognize that I'm a sinner. That it's so much easier to put the blame on not just somebody else, but like, there's this big conspiracy of people who are trying to keep me down and make my life miserable. And I'm part of this bigger group.
That's so easy. Like that's such an easy thing to do. Like if you're if you are like facing the repercussions,
it feels good too.
Yeah,
it feels so good. It's like, you imagine if you're like, those people over there, they're doing this, and I'm part of the group that's the good group, and we're doing the right thing, and we're gonna get them, and like, how dare they? Like, how do you know? I mean, that just feels good. Like if you think you're on the right side, and to make things that simple, and
God's concern is with your own position before Him.
Well, it's not just that, but God's concern is to call you like, hey, live righteously, but you're also live under subjection to every institution, knowing that you're going to suffer. It's just verse 19 of chapter 2. For it brings favor if, mindful of God's will, someone endures grief from suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if you sin and are punished and you endure it? But when you do what is good and suffer, if you endure it, this brings favor with God. For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you would follow in His steps. It's Peter saying, like, live honorably and live in subjection to these knowingly unjust institutions.
Yeah.
And you're going to suffer, but endure it, and endure it with grace, endure it with righteousness, endure it with even honoring those. I mean, look at the way that Paul deals with the people that most honorable Festus, like he could have been like, you are a terrible governor and you stink and God's going to kill you and you're going to hang from the gallows when God gets a hold of you and when his man gets in power. Crazy. But instead he's honoring to these people. And he's bold to preach the gospel, and
and there's a resignation to the reality that God is judge and that justice belongs to him.
Right.
And so like that's, vengeance is mine, I will repay, declares the Lord. So like there's a recognition that like the reason why we don't do these things is because we're not the judge. And the moment that we put ourselves in the position where like our group can inflict pain on another group is us essentially saying that like we're on the right side and we are competent and capable in our own righteousness to judge this other group, right?
Yeah.
But it's not coming from a place of humility that recognizes that all humanity sits in the same position underneath God, who is the judge, in the wrong. On the wrong side of his justice, in need of grace, in need of his son. And I think that's something that's just missing. And it's hard. It's easy to not think about those kinds of things when you're caught up in the frenzy and all this stuff going on. But as Christians, we never inflict justice on people.
Right.
It's not what we're called to.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes.
What?
Right, like within the government. I mean, we do.
Well, I think we can use. Well, I think there's a sense
your position you can use as a civilian.
I think you can use the means of the institutions, and we should
means or memes.
Means. I think you can look. None of this means that you don't, in a democracy or in the position that we're in, that you don't work towards making those institutions better, or that there's not a place for that. But it's also a recognition at the end of the day, there's going to be a limitation to that, and that your hope is not finally in fixing the stock market or electing better politicians. That's going to fix the problem. You're going to, it's on some level, you're always going to experience, as you are subject to these institutions, this kind of unjustness until the Lord returns, which is what Peter's trying to equip them with, and why he can say things like, don't fear what they fear or be disturbed, but honor the Messiah as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to give a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Do this with gentleness and respect, keeping your conscience clear, so that when you are accused, those who denounce your Christian life will be put to shame.
So I guess, like, as if you're a Christian doing business, basically what you're saying is like, kind of put your head down. Like, I mean, what's the application?
Well, so live peaceable lives.
Yeah, put your head down. Try to work like with sort of a
I think that is an application, but I think this conversation is more about focus on personal holiness before you talk about any kind of like public engagement,
right?
Because it's the work of speck removal, right? It's that parable, like don't look at the plank or the speck in your brother's eye when you have a plank in your own. So it's recognizing that, like, hey, we have a lot of work to do as Christians, as a country, and even the perception of Christians. We have a lot of work to do internally, not just in our churches, but even in our own personal lives. And it's so easy to sort of overlook that for the sake of, oh my gosh, can you believe how bad this society is and all the things that are going wrong? And it's way easier to do that than it is to actually deal with the sin in your own lives.
Amen.
But I think that focusing on that doesn't mean that you never engage in the public arena, but that is just so much more important, and that you'll never be in a position where you're actually going to be helpful until you deal with your own holiness.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, no, I agree. I think being in that position of just like, hey, like someone's, getting in a frenzy about the potential problems in the stock market. It was like, okay, I mean, like, what's your prayer life like? You know what I mean? Like, how are you, like you said, how are you focusing on what's going on, like, in your own heart, in your own life? And it's so much easier to become outraged, and you can do this on whatever side. Like, you can become outraged at this, or you can become outraged at that, and it seems like it's easier than ever. And it makes you, it's like a shortcut to personal holiness, because you're like, if I'm outraged about what they're doing, I feel pretty good, and I feel like I'm a pretty good person.
I don't have to be outraged,
and I don't have to deal with the fact that like I don't read the word, I haven't prayed it all this week, my house is a mess, my kids don't ever talk to me. Like, I don't have to deal with anything in my own life. I can just make it about everything out there, and I don't have to take responsibility for what's going on in here. And I think if that's the case, like, if that's the position you're in, if you're constantly railing against those people out there and the horrible things they're doing, and you're not dealing with your own life and what's going on in your own life, like, you got to take a step back and say, what does it profit me if
you fix the government?
If I fix the government, but I lose my soul, in the process. Nothing. And I think there are far too many people who would it's just so much easier to do that, though, and it doesn't make it any better that all you got to do is pull up a phone, and the people on your phone aren't generally encouraging you, hey, put your phone down and go read your Bible. They're like, do you know this horrible thing that's happening that you need to be aware of? It's so that it's not making it any easier. You have to intentionally do that.
Well, and I think that we all run that risk, and we also run the risk in doing the public arena work before the personal holiness. You run the risk of violating Christ's commands against hypocrisy. Like, beware of practicing your works in front of others to be seen by them, like the Pharisees did. Like, that's the thing. Like, personal holiness is just not glamorous. Like, nobody really cares.
Nobody's gonna clap for you.
Like, on Twitter, no one knows any of the stuff that you're doing behind the scenes, and no one's going to be impressed and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that God sees all of that, and that legitimately, like, in the long run, the people that are going to be helpful to society, if that's what you want to be, are the people that are aligned with God's will in such a way that they, will do that and know how to act and know how to help and have wisdom. All those things come from our personal relationship with the Lord, pursuing holiness.
I do think, like, as one last sort of, there's one other thing that I think we can take away from that, and that is, like, I think as Christians, if we recognize if every institution is trustworthy or untrustworthy, and let's endeavor to make sure that the church does not fall into that. Like, let's endeavor to make sure that the local church, or the local church that we're a part of, can fit into that sort of mold that Paul gives in Ephesians 4 or Ephesians 3, when he talks about the church being this mechanism through which God's multifaceted wisdom is made known to the rulers and authorities. And I think that means that pastors, church members, like, it means doing what you're talking about, because it means ultimately endeavoring to say, hey, like, let's be the one place where people can trust that, not that we're perfect, but that we are people who you can trust, who recognize, who aren't just working for our own personal gain, but who genuinely care about each other, who genuinely they know that we're Jesus' disciples by the way we love one another, who recognize there's an authenticity and a sincerity and a simplicity to our faith that is legitimate. That's not, okay, there's an ulterior motive here, and I'm afraid of what these people are trying to get out of me. And all of that just comes from that sincere, kind of hard, regular, boring, but crucial work of sanctification that takes place in our life. And I think if we're doing that, our local churches collective, like, we're going to be a place that people can come in and go, this should be refreshing. Like, I actually strangely trust these people, and they're trustworthy people, and I can be here, and I cannot. Especially for pastors, I think it's so important for pastors to see, man, one of my primary jobs is just to be somebody that other people trust.
Yeah.
And to shepherd in such a way where people see me not just as an authority, but a trustworthy authority that people can, because we need that. Like, we need that as Christians, and we need that so badly in our culture, for somebody to just be able to stand up and teach God's word with simplicity and sincerity in a way that someone can just say, like, I don't think that person has any other motive other than that just to preach the gospel, and I trust them because of that.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, I think that will honor God and certainly make us alien to the ways of the world.
Yep.
It's good.
Things of the world.
Yeah.
Amen.
It's good. Thanks for having me.
Never again.
Never. I want to come back, please.
No, I'm sorry.
No, you're coming back.
Yeah. That's good.
Until next time.